"Sir, she's hurting my mommy again." That single phone call from a 3-year-old little girl was enough to make Lorenzo De Luca, the most powerful mafia boss in the city, walk out of the most important meeting of the year. But the moment he returned to his mansion, what he saw froze him in place. "Hey there. Welcome back, friend. If this is your very first time landing on this channel, this is a place built for real, raw, emotional stories. The kind of stories that hold on to you long after the video is over. The kind that make you think about your own life, your own people, and the quiet moments you almost missed along the way. Before we go any further into tonight's story, we would love to know one small thing about you. Where in the world are you watching from right now? Whether it is a big city, a quiet town, a night shift, or a slow morning at home with a cup of coffee in your hand, drop your country flag in the comments below. It always warms our hearts to see how far this little corner of the internet quietly reaches every week. Lorenzo De Luca was 39 years old, and by every measure the streets of New York understood, he had already become the most powerful man in the city. He controlled ports on the East River, warehouses in Brooklyn, entire blocks of businesses that paid quiet respect to the De Luca name long before they paid rent to anyone else. Men who feared almost no one still lowered their voices when he walked into a room. When Lorenzo spoke, other bosses listened. When Lorenzo went silent, they listened even harder. His home sat on a hill on the outer edge of the city, where the noise of Manhattan softened into wind through the tall trees. It was an old stone mansion, the kind with iron gates as tall as 2 grown men, and walls thick enough to swallow gunshots without an echo. Cameras watched every angle of the property. Guards walked the grounds in shifts that never truly ended. Nothing came in that Lorenzo had not personally approved, and nothing left that he had not already accounted for down to the smallest detail. That was the world he had built. That was the world he had learned to trust far more than he trusted people. Inside those thick stone walls, however, the house felt different than it looked from the road. 3 years earlier, Lorenzo had lost his mother, the only person in the world who had ever spoken to him without weighing her words first. She had lived in the east wing of the mansion in her final years, filling the halls with the smell of tomato sauce simmering all afternoon, with old records playing a little too loud, with the sound of her calling his name from the kitchen, as if he were still a boy in short pants. When she was gone, the house went silent in a way Lorenzo had never expected, a silence that no amount of wealth or power could ever push back. So he did what men like Lorenzo always do. He worked. He left the estate before the sun rose, and he came back well after it had set. He held meetings in dim rooms full of quiet, dangerous men. He signed papers, gave orders, settled disputes between rival families with a single sentence and a long, flat stare. Power was the only language he still spoke fluently. Everything else, warmth, laughter, the small, ordinary comfort of belonging to someone, had been packed away with his mother's things and locked inside a room he almost never opened anymore. He would not have admitted it, not to his men, not to himself, but there were nights he stood alone in the great front hallway of that enormous mansion, listening for a voice that was never going to answer him again. And on those nights, he understood something that no rival, no politician, and no priest had ever managed to teach him properly. Into that heavy silence, a little more than 2 years earlier, had walked a woman named Sofia Bellini. She was 36 years old, a widow with tired eyes and a straight back, the kind of woman who looked as though she had already carried more than her share of the world and had simply decided to keep going. Her husband had died 4 years before in what the police report called an accident, a gas explosion at the small repair shop he ran on the edge of Queens. Sofia had signed the papers, buried him in a plain wooden casket, and never once said out loud what she thought in the quiet of her own kitchen. That the men who had come around asking her husband for favors in the weeks before the blast had not looked like the kind of men who took no for an answer. She had needed work. She had needed a roof that no one could take away on short notice. When the De Luca estate posted a quiet request for a live-in housekeeper through a private agency, Sofia had put on her only good dress, tied her hair back, and taken the interview without asking too many questions about who Lorenzo really was. She had understood, the moment she stepped through the tall iron gates, exactly what kind of house she had walked into. She had also understood that a woman with a small child and no husband could not afford the luxury of being afraid. Emma was 1 year old then. Now, over 2 years later, she was 3. A small, quiet girl with dark curls and her mother's watchful eyes. She did not chatter the way most children her age did. She listened, she watched. She remembered things far longer than the adults around her ever gave her credit for. She had grown up inside those long marble hallways the way other children grew up on quiet suburban streets, learning which floorboards creaked, which staircase was warmer in winter, and which of Lorenzo's guards would slip her a piece of candy when her mother was not looking. Sofia ran the mansion so smoothly that Lorenzo sometimes forgot how much work it took to keep a house that size alive. Fresh linens appeared without being asked for. His shirts were pressed before he noticed they needed pressing. The kitchen always smelled faintly of something warm, something that reminded him of another woman's cooking from years ago. To Lorenzo, Sophia was one of the few steady things in his life. Reliable, silent, present without being demanding. Emma moved through those same halls like a small shadow. Guards nodded as she passed. Cooks smiled without really seeing her. She was seen by many, remembered by almost none. And yet somehow, without anyone quite noticing, her soft laughter had begun to slip into the stone corners of that heavy house, filling the smallest cracks left behind by a mother no longer there. And then, into a house that had finally learned to breathe again, with the quiet steps of a small girl and the steady hands of her mother, walked a woman who would change everything. Her name was Vivian Rossi. She was 28 years old, dark-haired, softly spoken, and beautiful in the specific way that made men forget the questions they had meant to ask. She was the only daughter of Salvatore Rossi, an old business partner of the De Luca family whose name Lorenzo had known since he was a boy at his father's dinner table. Lorenzo met her one autumn evening at a charity gala in Manhattan, at one of those glass-ceilinged ballrooms where the wine was expensive and the smiles were even more so. She had stepped into his path with a champagne flute in one hand and a shy, unhurried smile, and she had said his name as though it were something she had been carrying quietly on her tongue for a very long time. She listened when he spoke, which almost no one else in his world ever did. Everyone else, his lieutenants, his lawyers, even the women he had once tried to keep close, listened for what they could use. Vivian listened as though whatever came out of his mouth was already precious to her. She asked about his mother without flinching at the answer. She asked about the house on the hill without asking about the money behind it. She held his gaze a beat longer than she needed to, and by the time the gala ended near 4 a.m, Lorenzo realized he had not looked at his phone once the entire night. The weeks that followed felt like something out of another man's life. Long dinners at small restaurants where Vivian pretended not to notice the guard seated 2 tables away, late-night phone calls that stretched until sunrise. Slow walks along the river with her arm tucked into his, her laugh soft against the cold air. She did not push. She did not demand. She simply seemed to understand, in some way no one else had bothered to, that beneath the tailored suits and the deep, careful voice there was a lonely man who had been waiting a very long time for someone to stay. 4 months after that first meeting, he asked her to marry him. She said yes with tears in her eyes, and within days she had moved into the east wing of the mansion, the same wing where his mother had once lived. To Lorenzo, Vivian was the perfect future wife. Gentle, attentive, endlessly supportive of the long hours he kept. She packed small notes into his coat pocket for him to find later in the car. She kissed him at the door every morning, as though she could not wait for him to come home. Sophia, however, watched from the corners of that same house. And Sophia was beginning to see something Lorenzo could not yet allow himself to see at all. The change happened almost the moment the tall iron gates closed behind Lorenzo's black sedan each morning. Sophia noticed it in the very first week, and by the second week she could set her watch by it. While Lorenzo was in the driveway, Vivian's voice was a lullaby. She would fuss over the collar of his coat, brush an invisible speck of dust from his shoulder, kiss him once at the door and again at the top of the stone steps. She would wave from the window until the taillights disappeared past the gatehouse. And then, in the small space between one breath and the next, the softness would slide off her face like a mask lifted from wet clay. "You," she would say, without turning around. "The floors in the West Wing look like they have not been touched in a week. Do them again. All of them." Before lunch, Sophia would look up from whatever she was doing and find Vivian's eyes on her, cold and flat and utterly unimpressed. And she would understand, in that single glance, exactly what kind of woman had just walked into this house. The orders grew sharper. Bed sheets that had been changed the day before were declared unacceptable and stripped again. Silverware polished once had to be polished twice. Vivian would leave a wet glass ring on a wooden table and then summon Sophia to explain why the wood looked so poorly cared for. She never raised her voice. She never had to. Cruelty spoken softly cuts far deeper than cruelty spoken loud. Emma was not spared either. From the first week, Vivian made it clear that the child was not permitted anywhere near the main sitting room where she took her afternoon tea. "Children touch things," she said to Sophia once, without looking at Emma at all, though the little girl was standing right beside her mother. "And I do not have the patience to explain what is expensive and what is not." Emma understood without needing the words. She stopped wandering. She stayed close to Sophia's leg the way a small quiet animal stays close to the only wall it knows will not move. Whenever Vivian's heels clicked into a room, Emma's small hand would find her mother's apron and hold on tight without a sound. There was one evening Sophia would never forget. Lorenzo had come home early, in a rare good mood, and Vivian had been laughing at something he said in the front hallway. She had turned, seen Emma standing near the console table, and bent down with a bright, warm smile to smooth back a strand of the child's dark curls in front of him. Emma flinched so hard she stumbled backward and nearly knocked over the tall porcelain lamp behind her. Sophia caught the lamp with one hand, and her daughter with the other in a single motion born of pure instinct. Lorenzo laughed, a low, affectionate sound. "Ah, she is just shy. My mother said I was the same at that age." Vivian laughed too, sweet and light, straightening up as though nothing had happened at all, and Sophia, still holding her trembling daughter against her hip, felt her own heart drop somewhere far beneath the marble floor. The man in the black coat first appeared about 3 weeks after that evening with the porcelain lamp. Sophia was hanging fresh towels near the small back window of the laundry room, the one that looked out past the pantry roof and directly onto the rose bushes at the far end of the garden. It was a quiet mid-morning. Lorenzo had left for a meeting in the city just after dawn, and the mansion was moving in that soft, breath-held way it always did when he was gone. She glanced up at the window without any particular reason, the way people do when their hands are busy and their minds are already 3 tasks ahead, and she saw him. He was tall and lean, almost too thin for the long dark coat he wore. His shoes were polished leather, the kind that caught even a weak sun. He walked with the unhurried confidence of a man who knew exactly which side gate had been left unlocked for him. Sophia watched him step through the small servant's entrance at the far edge of the property, cut across the gravel path, and disappear behind the tall row of roses at the back of the garden. The exact spot, she realized slowly, where no camera on the estate could see him. A minute later, Vivian appeared from the direction of the sunroom, wrapped in a soft cream cardigan, and slipped through the same gap in the hedges. Emma, standing on a small wooden stool beside her mother and folding a washcloth in her tiny hands, followed Sophia's gaze without a word. She lifted one small finger toward the glass and whispered, so softly that only Sophia could hear, "The black coat man is here again, Mommy." Sophia's hands stopped moving. Again, she lowered herself slowly, pretending to sort towels on the low shelf beneath the window, and eased it open a crack. Warm garden air drifted in, carrying with it fragments of voices from the other side of the rose bushes. Vivian's voice, low and clipped. A man's voice, calm as still water. "After the wedding, there will be no reason to rush it. Once he signs everything, the paperwork does the rest of the work for us. No marks, understand me, no marks that anyone could ever trace back." Then Vivian's soft laugh, dry and humorless. Nothing like the laugh she used in front of Lorenzo. "Do not worry about him. He does not even see what is right in front of him." Sophia eased the window shut with hands that had started to tremble. She stayed there for a long moment, one arm around Emma, staring at the innocent white curtain, as if it might explain what she had just heard. She had no proof. She had no name for the man in the black coat. She had only fragments, half-sentences, and a small child's whispered warning. And yet somewhere deep in her stomach, that same old widow's instinct was wide awake again, whispering the same warning it had whispered before her husband's shop went up in flames. Have you ever felt certain about someone long before you had any real proof? Tell us honestly in the comments below. We read every single one. From that morning on, Sophia began to keep a list she never wrote down anywhere. It lived only in her head, tucked carefully behind the ordinary chores of the day, the way a widow learns to carry heavy things without letting anyone see the weight. Tuesday, 10:20 in the morning, black coat at the side gate. Thursday, just before noon, black coat again, longer this time, almost half an hour behind the roses. Sunday evening, after the driver had taken Lorenzo to the city, Vivian in the sunroom on a call, she cupped one hand over the phone to hide. Sophia noted the day, she noted the hour, she noted which door Vivian used to slip in and out. She never spoke a word of it to anyone but Emma, and Emma only nodded quietly, the way small children nod when they are agreeing with something the grown-ups have not yet named. Meanwhile, at the long dining table in the evenings, Vivian's other work continued in a much softer voice. "Darling," she would say, cutting a delicate slice of pear onto Lorenzo's plate, "have you thought about updating your life insurance? It has been years, has it not? We are practically family already, and I would feel so much better knowing it reflects our new life together." Lorenzo would smile, tired from the day, warmed by the small, ordinary attention. "I will get to it, my love. Soon." Another night, over coffee in the sitting room, her voice again, gentle and reasonable. "The house is so much yours, Lorenzo. I know that, but it might be nice, before the wedding, to put my name on part of it, just as a gesture, to feel like it is truly ours now. My mother did the same for my father. She always said it was the moment she truly felt at home." Another night, papers spread on the low table between them. "The lawyers say your investment accounts are scattered across too many places. My love, it complicates everything. It would be so much simpler to consolidate before the wedding, so you do not have to think about any of it during the honeymoon. Just sign, and I will handle the rest." Lorenzo laughed, a low, indulgent laugh, and kissed the top of her head. "You worry too much about paperwork. I will look at it when the merger is done." He did not sign anything that night, but he did not say no either. Sophia had been polishing the sideboard just a few steps away, cloth moving in slow, careful circles across the dark wood. She kept her eyes on her work. She kept her breathing steady, but somewhere between one turn of the cloth and the next, a cold, thin thread ran down her spine and settled at the small of her back. She had heard a voice like that before, sweet on the surface, sharp underneath, a voice that spoke of insurance and paperwork and small, simple signatures. Her husband had heard a voice like that once too, in the weeks before his shop went up in flames. Sophia's widow instinct had been right the first time. She was quietly, deeply certain it was right again. It took Sophia almost a week after that evening to gather the courage to knock on the door of Lorenzo's private study. She waited until Vivian had gone upstairs for the night, until the mansion had settled into that particular late-hour hush where even the guards spoke in low tones. Emma was asleep in her small bed in the staff wing, one hand curled around a stuffed rabbit that had been mended at the ear more than once. Sophia stood outside the tall, dark door of the study for a long moment, one hand pressed flat against her apron, rehearsing the words she had turned over 100 times while polishing silver. She knocked twice. His voice, low and tired, told her to come in. Lorenzo was at his desk, a low lamp burning on one side, papers stacked high enough to hide half his face. He looked older in that light than he ever did in the front hallway. The muscles around his jaw were tight, the way they always were when a deal was closing badly. He did not look angry, only very, very worn. Sophia's carefully rehearsed sentence dissolved in her throat. "Forgive me, sir," she said instead, dropping her eyes to the rug. "I only wanted to ask if there is anything special you would like from the market tomorrow." Lorenzo blinked at her once, then gave her a small, tired smile. "Whatever you think is best, Sophia. You always know." He turned back to his papers. She left the room with her hands cold and steady, and she hated herself the whole way down the corridor. The second time was 2 nights later. This time she made herself say more. "Sir, forgive me for intruding again, but I have noticed a gentleman coming to the garden in the afternoons. A tall man, in a long dark coat. He comes in through the side gate, and he meets with Miss Rossi behind the roses. I thought perhaps you should know." Lorenzo lifted his eyes from his desk slowly. The tiredness there did not leave, but something else moved beneath it, something harder, something protective in the wrong direction. That would be a partner of her cousin's, Sophia. "He is helping Vivian arrange a surprise for the wedding. She mentioned it to me weeks ago." His voice cooled, 1 degree at a time. "I would appreciate it very much if you did not speak that way about the woman I am about to marry. Not to me. Not to anyone in this house." Sophia lowered her head. "Yes, sir. Of course, sir. I am sorry." She backed out of the study, closed the door softly, and stood in the dark hallway for a long moment with her back pressed against the wood, listening to her own heartbeat. She would not try again. Not without proof he could not wave away. Not while a single wrong word could put Emma out of this house and back on a street she had no way of protecting her on. She would keep watching. She would keep listening. And she would keep her mouth shut until the truth grew teeth of its own. The hardest truths are the ones we cannot afford to speak yet. The night the truth finally showed its full face, the sky over the estate opened up into one of those late spring storms that hammered the windows sideways and turned the long gravel driveway into a river of silver. Sophia had put Emma to bed early. The child had fallen asleep against her shoulder before the last spoon of soup, warm and heavy in the way only a small child can be. Sophia had carried her down the long hallway to the staff wing, tucked her under a the little cloth doll Emma always slept with. The doll was still in the library, forgotten on the low armchair where Emma had been playing that afternoon. She thought about leaving it until morning. Then she thought of Emma waking at midnight, small hand reaching into the dark for a doll that was not there. She lifted her sleeping daughter carefully back into her arms and set off down the long corridor toward the library. The mansion at that hour was almost black. Rain drummed against the tall windows in uneven waves. Sophia's soft shoes made no sound on the marble. She had almost reached the library door when she saw the thin strip of yellow light spilling out from beneath it. She heard Vivian's voice on the other side. Sophia stopped. Every instinct her widowed life had taught her froze her in place. She pressed herself back against the wall beside the door, Emma still limp and warm against her shoulder, and she listened without breathing. Vivian was on the phone. The voice on the other end was faint, but Sophia could just make out the low, gravelly rumble of an older man, and she heard, very clearly, the word Vivian used to answer him. "Yes, father. Don Salvatore Rossi." Sophia felt the floor tilt just slightly under her feet. "Everything is exactly on schedule," Vivian was saying, her voice low, businesslike. entirely stripped of the sweetness she wore around Lorenzo. The wedding is set. Once the ceremony is over and the paperwork is filed, I will be legally recognized as his wife. That is the only piece we ever needed. A pause, the rumble of the man's voice, then Vivian again. No, not before. It has to be after. If anything happens to him before the wedding, I inherit nothing. It has to look like an ordinary hit, a rival family, an old grudge. Marco has already drawn the plan, a staged strike, 2 shooters, 1 witness we can pay off. It will look like a war between families that has nothing to do with us, and I will be the grieving widow, standing beside his coffin, holding the entire DeLuca empire in my hands before the flowers on the grave are dry. Sophia's chest turned to ice. Father, Vivian said, quieter now, almost fond, please. Do not worry about him. He trusts me completely. He does not question anything I say. No one is going to suspect a thing. By this time next year, everything the DeLuca name owns will be under Rossi hands. Sophia stood frozen behind the door with her small sleeping daughter breathing softly against her neck, rain roaring against the tall windows, and one single, absolute certainty settling into her bones like cold iron. She could not unhear this. She could not unknow this. Some secrets, once heard, leave no road back. Sophia had not slept. She had backed away from the library door in the dark, carried Emma to the staff wing, laid her carefully in her small bed, and then sat on the edge of her own narrow mattress for the rest of the night. Her hands folded tight in her lap, and the rain still hammering the roof above her head. She had watched the gray light of morning crawl slowly across the floorboards, and she had decided, sometime around dawn, that she would tell Lorenzo everything tonight. No more careful sentences, no more hoping he would ask the right question. Tonight, whatever the cost, he would hear the truth. She did not know that in the library, at almost the same hour, Vivian had already begun to piece together a truth of her own. Vivian rose late, as she always did, and drifted into the library in her silk robe with a cup of black coffee. The room still smelled faintly of the candles she had burned the night before. She crossed to the low armchair to gather up the throw blanket, and her eyes stopped on the seat cushion. A small cloth doll lay there, handmade, its right ear stitched crookedly with a slightly different color of thread. Vivian stood very still. She had been alone in that room last night. She was absolutely certain of it. And yet, at some point in the middle of her call, she remembered a faint sound in the hallway, a sound she had told herself at the time was only the wind against the tall windows. She set the cup down slowly. She did not touch the doll. Then she walked out to the front hall and asked, in her sweetest voice, for Antonio. Antonio was Lorenzo's oldest guard, a broad, quiet man who had walked beside him for almost 20 years. He came at once, cap in hand, and inclined his head. Miss Rossi, Antonio, Vivian said, smiling as though she were only curious. Such a strange storm last night. I thought I heard footsteps in the west corridor near the library, well after midnight. Was one of the guards making rounds inside? Antonio thought for a moment. No, miss. Inside the house, only the housekeeper. Sophia went down the west corridor toward the library shortly after 11. She was carrying the little one. I saw them both on the hallway camera. Vivian's smile did not move. Ah, of course. She must have been fetching something for the child. Thank you, Antonio. He nodded and walked away. Vivian stood in the front hall for a long moment, one hand still curled around her coffee cup, and something behind her eyes turned very cold and very still. At breakfast, Sophia felt that gaze before she saw it. She was setting a bowl of fresh fruit on the sideboard when she looked up and found Vivian watching her from the head of the table. There was no anger in the look. There was no confusion. There was only the flat, careful calculation of a woman deciding exactly how a problem would be removed. Sophia lowered her eyes and finished her work. Her hand stayed steady. Inside, everything had gone very quiet. Emma, who noticed everything her mother felt, did not leave her side once that entire day. Her small hand held Sophia's apron with a grip that did not loosen. Vivian, however, had no intention of waiting until evening. She had already made her plan, and she would strike long before Sophia ever reached that study door. Just after 2 in the afternoon, when Sophia was in the far end of the kitchen preparing Emma's snack, Vivian moved. She climbed the wide central staircase in soft slippers, her silk robe replaced now with a simple pale dress that would soon read as innocent to anyone watching. She walked past her own bedroom without stopping, and went instead to the door of the master suite, the room Lorenzo used to prepare for the day. From a small drawer inside his tall walnut dresser, tucked beneath folded silk handkerchiefs, she lifted out a single object, a jewelry box covered in deep navy velvet, worn smooth at the corners from decades of careful handling. Inside, resting on a bed of faded cream silk, was the pearl and diamond necklace that had once belonged to Lorenzo's mother. It was the most precious thing in the entire mansion. He had told Vivian, in one of their late-night conversations before the engagement, that his mother had worn it on the day she married his father, and that he would place it around the neck of the woman he would call his wife. Vivian held the box in one hand for less than a second, feeling its weight. There was no emotion on her face. She snapped it shut. She carried the closed box back down through the servants' corridor, moving with the easy, ordinary pace of a woman going about her morning. In the small alcove where the housekeeping cart was kept between rooms, Sophia's cleaning trolley stood exactly where it was always left, stocked with fresh linens and small bottles of polish. On the lower shelf, half hidden behind a stack of folded towels, there was a shallow drawer. Vivian opened the drawer, slid the navy velvet box inside, closed it again, and rearranged the towels so that the drawer looked exactly as it had before. The whole action took less than 20 seconds. Then she walked back to her own bedroom, checked her reflection once in the mirror, and let out a scream. It was not a small scream. It tore through the mansion, echoing off marble and stone. Doors slammed open. Guards ran down corridors. Vivian appeared at the top of the staircase with her hands clutched to her chest, tears already welling in her eyes. My God, someone has taken it. His mother's necklace. It is gone from the box. Within minutes, the entire estate was in motion. Antonio barked orders down the hallway. Guards fanned out through the rooms. Vivian sobbed, her voice trembling, telling anyone who would listen that she had only opened the drawer to see it once more before the wedding, that it had always been there, that no one but the household staff had access to that dresser. Sophia came out of the kitchen, with a dish towel still in her hand, Emma clinging to her leg. She had heard the shouting from the far end of the house and hurried forward without knowing what had happened. What is it? What is missing? Vivian did not answer her. Vivian's eyes, red-rimmed and glittering, cut past her toward the housekeeping cart at the end of the hall. Sophia felt something inside her turn to ice for the second time in less than a day. She did not know yet what the drawer of her cart contained. She only knew that whatever it contained, it had been placed there for one purpose alone. Between a beautiful woman weeping into her hands and a housekeeper standing frozen with confusion in her eyes, who would you believe? Tell us honestly in the comments. Search everything, Vivian sobbed, waving one trembling hand toward the far end of the corridor. Every drawer, every cart, every basket. His mother's necklace does not simply walk out of a locked dresser. Two of the younger guards moved at once. Sophia stood very still where she was, one arm around Emma, her mouth slightly open in the pure, unstaged confusion of someone who did not yet understand what was happening to her. The guards reached the housekeeping trolley. One of them, following Vivian's tearful gesture, crouched down and slid open the lower drawer beneath the folded towels. His hand froze for half a second. Then he lifted out a small, deep navy velvet box. The whole hallway went quiet. The guard opened the box. The pearls inside caught the afternoon light. Everyone in the corridor could see them. Vivian let out a small, broken sound and pressed one hand to her mouth. Oh, Sophia. Oh, Sophia. No, I did not put that there, Sophia said. Her own voice sounded very far away to her. I swear to God, I did not put that there. I have not opened that dresser in weeks. Please, I need to speak with Mr. DeLuca. Now, right now. Of course you do, Vivian whispered, and stepped forward with tears sliding down her cheeks in perfect straight lines. She reached out and, very gently, took Sophia by the elbow. Her fingers were cold. Come, let us talk somewhere quieter first, you and I, for Emma's sake. Antonio, please, take the child to the kitchen. Give the poor thing something warm. Antonio hesitated for only a moment before he obeyed. Emma clung to her mother's apron and had to be gently pried away. Her small face turned back over Antonio's shoulder as he carried her down the hall. Vivian steered Sophia in the opposite direction, down the long east corridor, past the sunroom, into the narrow secondary hallway, where the older cameras had been out of order for weeks. Sophia had not thought about that until this moment. Now she understood, very clearly, that Vivian had. Vivian released her arm the moment they were alone. The tears on her face stopped as if a switch had been flipped. So, she said quietly, holding up the small navy box between them. What exactly were you planning to tell Lorenzo tonight? Sophia's chest tightened. I have not stolen anything from this house. Not one thing in 2 years. That is not what I asked you. I want to see Mr. DeLuca. Answer me, Sophia. What were you going to tell him? Everything. Sophia's voice was quiet now, but it did not shake. About the man in the black coat. About the phone call last night in the library. About your father. About all of it. For a long moment, Vivian did not move. She simply looked at Sophia the way a person might look at a stain they were about to decide how to remove. Then she held the necklace up between them like a small glittering weapon. Look at this. His mother's pearls, found inside your cart, in front of his own guards. Now think, very carefully, whose word is he going to take? The word of his beautiful, grieving fiancé, or the word of a widow who cleans his floors? Sophia did not lower her eyes. He will believe me eventually. Because it is the truth. Vivian's beautiful face changed. The last of the mask slipped, and there was nothing left beneath it that was soft at all. Sophia moved first. She had spent her entire life being careful, being small, being the woman who lowered her eyes and waited. But standing in that dim east corridor, staring at the woman who had planned her husband's death, and now held Lorenzo's mother's necklace as a weapon against her, something inside Sophia's chest simply refused to bend one more inch. She lunged for the necklace. Vivian was not expecting it. The delicate box flew from her fingers and clattered against the marble floor. The pearls spilled out in a soft, terrible sound. For a single breath, the two women stared at each other, and then Vivian's face contorted, and she moved with a speed no woman in silk was supposed to possess. She slammed Sophia backward against the wall. A small framed painting shuddered off its hook and cracked against the floor. Sophia tried to twist away, but Vivian's hands were already at her throat. They closed around her windpipe with a grip born of pure, cornered panic. Sophia clawed at those wrists. She kicked. Her nails scraped against the smooth, pale skin of Vivian's forearms. But Vivian was leaning her full weight forward now, teeth bared, breath hissing between them, and her hands did not loosen. "You should have kept your mouth shut," Vivian rasped. So close Sophia could feel the words on her cheek. "You should have kept your eyes on the floor and your questions in your throat. Do you know how easy it is going to be, Sophia? A housekeeper caught with a priceless necklace. A struggle in a hallway. An unfortunate accident. Not one person in this house is going to lose a night of sleep over a servant who reached above her station." Sophia's vision was beginning to swim at the edges. The corridor was tilting. She could no longer make her fingers grip. Her mouth was open, but no air was coming in. She thought, in that dim, narrowing tunnel, of Emma. Of her daughter waking one morning in a world where her mother had simply not come back for her. Of that small stuffed rabbit with the mended ear, held in a hand no one would ever fold gently around anything again. At the far end of the corridor, half hidden behind the tall potted fig tree that stood in the corner between the sunroom and the east hall, a very small figure had gone completely still. Emma had slipped away from Antonio in the kitchen the moment his back was turned. Her mother had never been out of her sight for a whole day. She had followed the sound of the two voices down the corridor as quietly as her small feet would carry her. Now she stood frozen behind the wide green leaves, her tiny hand pressed hard against her own mouth, her eyes enormous with a kind of terror no 3-year-old should ever have to know. She did not scream. She did not cry out. Some very deep part of her understood, without being told, that a sound now would bring those hands off her mother's throat and onto her own. Sophia's arms went slack against the wall. Her body sagged. The corridor darkened around her. Vivian held on for another long, careful moment, then let her slide slowly down onto the marble. She stepped back, breathing hard, and looked down at the still shape on the floor. Then, with cold professional care, she bent, gathered the loose pearls, dropped the broken necklace beside Sophia's open hand, and began arranging the scene of a struggle. She never once looked toward the potted fig tree at the end of the hall. Behind the potted fig tree, something in Emma moved that no one had ever taught her. She did not scream. She did not run to her mother. Some small instinct, older than she was, whispered that a sound now would bring those hands looking for another throat. Her tiny fingers loosened from her mouth. She backed away from the leaves, one silent step at a time, then turned and ran. She did not run toward Antonio. She did not run to the kitchen. She ran, on soft little feet, in the direction her mother had walked so many mornings with a stack of clean towels in her arms, toward the long corridor that led to the wing with the tall dark door, toward Lorenzo's study. Emma had been in that study 100 times, always at her mother's ankles. She had watched Sophia dust the wide desk and polish the tall leather chair. She had watched Sophia carefully wipe the base of the black telephone that sat on the corner of the desk, and she had watched, more times than the grown-ups ever noticed, when Sophia picked up that receiver and pressed a single button along the top row to reach Lorenzo directly whenever a delivery came, or a driver was late, or a meal needed to wait. Emma had learned that button the way other children learned their own names. She reached the study door and pushed it open with her small shoulder. The room was empty and dim, only one lamp still burning on the desk. She crossed the wide rug in a straight, quiet line and stopped in front of the tall leather chair. It was much too high for her, but she had climbed it before, when her mother's back was turned, just to see what the world looked like from Lorenzo's side of the room. She climbed it now, both small hands on the armrest, one knee up, then the other. She swayed once, steadied herself, and reached for the receiver with both hands. It was heavy and cold. She lifted it to her ear the way she had seen her mother do 100 times. Then she pressed the single button at the top of the row. The line clicked. Somewhere across the city, a phone began to ring. In a private meeting room on the 34th floor of a glass tower in Manhattan, Lorenzo DeLuca sat at the head of a long table lined with the most powerful men of 3 families. This was the meeting of the year. Every eye in the room was on him. And in his coat pocket, his personal line began to vibrate. He almost ignored it. He almost let it go. Nothing on that private line called him during a meeting like this. Nothing except the house. He lifted the phone below the edge of the table. He answered without a word. There was a small breath on the other end. Then, in a voice smaller and more broken than he had ever heard it, a voice he knew instantly because it had never once used that tone before, came the words that stopped Lorenzo DeLuca's heart mid-beat. "Sir, she's hurting my mommy again." Lorenzo felt every ounce of blood in his body drop straight through the floor. He was already standing before he understood he had stood up. Chairs scraped around the table. Men fell silent. His voice, when it came, was very quiet and very cold. "Cancel everything. Get me my car. Now." The drive from the tower in Manhattan to the tall iron gates on the hill should have taken 40 minutes. Lorenzo made it in 15. He did not speak to his driver. He did not speak to the 2 guards seated across from him in the back of the black car. He sat with his hands folded in his lap and his jaw locked so tight that a small muscle at his temple would not stop moving. He had not felt this cold since the morning his mother died. He had not felt this afraid since he was a boy. The car tore up the gravel drive and skidded to a halt at the front steps. Lorenzo was out of the door before it had fully stopped. He crossed the wide stone steps in 3 long strides and pushed the heavy front door open with the flat of his hand. The mansion was strangely quiet. That was the first thing he noticed. No shouting, no hurried footsteps, only the soft, distant sound of a small child crying somewhere down the east corridor. He followed it. He rounded the corner into the narrow east hall, and the world stopped. Sophia was on the floor. She lay on her side against the wall, one arm curled beneath her, dark bruises already blooming in an ugly ring around her throat. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven waves. Broken pearls glittered across the marble around her like fallen teeth. And Emma, tiny and shaking, sat curled against her mother's shoulder with her small forehead pressed to Sophia's cheek, sobbing without any sound at all. Lorenzo dropped to his knees so hard the marble bit into them and he did not feel it. He pressed 2 fingers to the side of Sophia's neck. There was a pulse there, faint and fluttering, but alive. Behind him, at the far end of the corridor, came the sound of running heels. Vivian appeared with her hair tumbled loose from its pins, mascara smudged in perfect tragic lines beneath her eyes, one silk sleeve torn at the shoulder. She stopped when she saw him, one hand flying to her mouth, and burst into a fresh wave of tears. "Lorenzo. Oh God, Lorenzo. Thank God you are home." He did not stand. "She stole from you," Vivian sobbed, moving closer, arms open. "Your mother's necklace. From your dresser. The guards found it in her cart. I brought her here to speak with her privately, to give her the dignity of explaining herself before we told you. And she attacked me. She flew at me. She tried to take it back." Her hands trembled beautifully as she pointed toward the floor. Look at the pearls. I only tried to defend myself." She would not stop. "I did not mean for it to go this far. I swear to you, on my mother's grave, I did not mean for it to go this far." She pointed one shaking finger at the broken necklace glittering beside Sophia's hand. Lorenzo looked at the pearls. He looked at Sophia's bruised throat. He looked at Emma, silent and trembling against her mother. And in that terrible moment, staring at a scene arranged as carefully as any painting, hearing a story delivered with a voice he had listened to for months in bed and over dinner and in the front hallway every morning, Lorenzo DeLuca did what a lonely man does when the woman he loves is weeping in front of him. He believed her. The private ambulance came within minutes. Sophia was carried out on a stretcher with an oxygen mask over her face, and the bruises on her throat already turning a deep, angry purple. Lorenzo watched them lift her into the back of the vehicle, and something inside his chest twisted in a way he could not fully explain to himself yet. Emma refused to let go of her mother's blanket. In the end, Antonio had to carry the child gently back into the mansion, and she cried against his broad shoulder in a way that only stopped when exhaustion finally pulled her down into a restless sleep near dawn. She cried the entire night. She would not eat. She would not speak to Vivian, who hovered nearby with a fresh cup of warm milk and a face full of soft, wounded concern. Every time the woman came within 3 steps of her, Emma turned her small face into the pillow and pressed both hands over her ears. Whenever anyone else came near her, though, she said the same thing over and over, in that small broken voice. "My mommy did not take his things. Miss Vivian hurt my mommy. Miss Vivian hurt my mommy." Lorenzo heard it. He heard it the first night, When Antonio carried the child past his study, he heard it the second morning, from the housekeeper who brought her breakfast. He told himself the same thing each time. She is 3 years old. She saw her mother fall. She is confused. She loves her mother, so she cannot imagine her mother in the wrong. It is only a child's grief. But the child kept talking. By the third day, Emma had begun to say more than that. She said it quietly, whenever Lorenzo passed her in the hall. Miss Vivian put the necklace in Mommy's cart. I saw her, in the drawer under the towels. He froze the first time she said it. He turned to look at her. Emma sat curled on the wide staircase, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, watching him with those dark, still eyes of hers. What did the box look like, sweetheart? Dark blue, like the sky at night, soft on the outside, the soft cloth ones. He had never once shown her that box. The next morning, she added, and the man in the black coat comes to the roses when you are gone. Miss Vivian goes out to talk to him. Mommy saw. I saw too. Lorenzo did not answer her that time. He walked away from the staircase without saying a single word, and he shut himself in his study for almost 2 hours. A 3-year-old could invent a monster in her mother's defense. He knew that. Every child could invent a monster. But a 3-year-old did not invent the exact color of navy velvet. She did not invent the drawer beneath the towels. She did not invent a tall, thin man in a long, dark coat at the back gate on the days when her mother was folding laundry near the small window. Lorenzo sat at his desk with his hands folded, and for the first time in months, he began to feel the ground under his feet quietly shifting. Something in this house was not what he had been told. That same night, after the house had gone quiet and Vivian had gone up to bed, Lorenzo picked up the phone in his study and called for Antonio. Antonio came at once. He had walked beside Lorenzo for almost 20 years, since the days when Lorenzo was still a young man learning what his own name meant on the street. He shut the study door behind him without being asked, and he stood, cap in hand, waiting. Antonio, Lorenzo said, without looking up from his desk, I want the security footage from the east corridor. Every camera. The full afternoon. Yes, sir. An hour later, Antonio came back with a small storage drive and a face that had gone very still. He set the drive on the desk, and then set a printed report beside it. The footage from the East Hall between 1 and 4 in the afternoon is missing, sir. Not corrupted, not overwritten, deleted, cleanly, from inside the system. Whoever did it had the access codes and knew exactly which time window to remove. Lorenzo lifted his eyes to Antonio's face for a long moment. Then he nodded. Once. Find out who touched the system that day. Every guard, every technician, every name. There is more, sir. Antonio placed a second folder on the desk. I began looking at accounts, quietly, after you asked me last week to double-check the household payroll. 3 guards and 2 of the estate managers have received private transfers over the past 6 months. The transfers come through shell accounts, but the source traces back to a holding company owned by the Rossi family. Small payments at first. Larger recently. Lorenzo did not move. His face did not change. And the tall man, sir, the one the child speaks of. I ran his description through our contacts. He goes by Marco. He has been a personal enforcer of Don Salvatore Rossi for almost 15 years. He is not the partner of any cousin. He does not plan weddings. For a long moment, the only sound in the study was the soft ticking of the tall clock in the corner. Thank you, Antonio, Lorenzo said quietly. That will be all for tonight. Say nothing to anyone. Not one word. Not even to the men. Yes, sir. The next morning, Lorenzo drove himself to the hospital. He walked into Sophia's room alone, without guards, and sat down beside her bed. She was pale, her throat wrapped in soft gauze, her voice still rough as sand when she tried to speak. But her eyes, when she saw him, went clear and steady in an instant. He took her hand. Tell me, he said, quietly, everything you were going to tell me that night, from the beginning. And Sophia, in that hoarse whisper, told him about a rainy evening in the library, and a phone call to a father she had not been meant to hear, and the exact words she had heard through a door she should never have stood behind. Lorenzo listened without interrupting. His face did not change, but his grip on her hand slowly tightened. Have you ever discovered that someone close to you had been betraying you all along? Tell us in the comments. We want to hear. When Lorenzo walked back through the front doors of the mansion that afternoon, no one who saw his face would have guessed anything had changed. Vivian met him in the front hall with a soft, careful smile and a small glass of red wine already poured. She kissed him on the cheek and asked him gently how the office had been. He kissed her back on the forehead. He told her the office had been long. He told her, in a low, tired voice, that he had gone to see the housekeeper at the hospital because he owed her that much after so many years of service, and that the poor woman was too weak to say much of anything. Vivian's shoulders relaxed under his hands in a way she did not know he could feel. He held her at the small of her back. He smiled at her over dinner. He touched her hair as they went upstairs at night. Whatever he felt beneath his own skin, he did not let a single flicker of it reach his face. The wedding preparations continued exactly on schedule. Flowers were ordered, vows were rehearsed, Vivian's dress had a final fitting. Lorenzo signed off on every arrangement with a warm, distracted smile, and Vivian's calls to her father grew brighter and more certain with each passing day. Behind that smooth surface, however, Lorenzo was moving quickly and silently. The very next morning, Sophia was quietly transferred out of the public hospital to a small private clinic on the north edge of the city that no name in the Rossi family had ever heard of. 2 of Lorenzo's oldest personal men were placed at her door in plain clothes. Emma was moved with her to a warm, safe room down the same hallway, and Antonio himself sat outside that door each night. No one at the estate was told where they had gone. No one asked. The staff had already been informed that the housekeeper had chosen to return to her family for recovery. Inside the mansion, in the space of a single week, every guard whose name had appeared on that private list of Rossi transfers was quietly reassigned to a distant warehouse and replaced with men Lorenzo had known personally for over a decade. New cameras were installed in places no one had thought to look. A soft, invisible listening device was placed inside the light fixture of the sunroom, another inside the frame of the mirror in Vivian's dressing room. Every call she made, every whisper she uttered, was now recorded onto a small drive that only Antonio and Lorenzo would ever hear. Lorenzo did not want only Vivian. He wanted the entire hand behind her. He wanted Marco. He wanted the men on the payroll list. And most of all, he wanted Don Salvatore Rossi, standing where he could not deny a single word. To catch a snake by the head, he understood. You first had to let it think its own poison was still hidden. So he smiled. He signed. He kissed his beautiful fiancée goodnight and let her whisper sweet, patient plans against his shoulder while a small red light in the mirror frame quietly gathered every one of them. The strongest revenge is patience wearing the face of trust. The night before the wedding, the mansion glowed softly from the inside, its long windows lit by candles and low golden lamps, its front steps already lined with fresh white flowers. At a few minutes past midnight, Vivian rose from bed in a dark silk robe and slipped down the servants' staircase in bare feet. She moved through the sleeping house like a woman who had walked this exact path in her head 100 times. She crossed the darkened kitchen. She turned the small, heavy key in the door of the rear service entrance. She lifted the iron latch at the far back gate, and she let it swing open behind her without a sound. Beyond the gate, waiting in the shadows of the long stone wall, stood her father. Don Salvatore Rossi walked into the estate at the head of nearly 24 armed men, dressed in dark coats, moving in the silent, practiced way of men who had killed inside other men's houses before. Marco walked at his shoulder, the long black coat trailing behind him like a second shadow. Vivian met her father's eyes across the courtyard and lifted a small, trembling smile. He is asleep upstairs, father. The old guards have all been kept far from the estate tonight, just as you said. It is done. Salvatore laid one hand briefly on her cheek. You have done well, my daughter. They stepped into the inner courtyard together. Every floodlight on the estate came on at the same instant. The night went white. Vivian threw one arm up against the sudden blaze of light, gasping. Salvatore froze in the middle of the gravel. Around them, from every doorway, every archway, every roofline of the mansion, silent men stepped forward with rifles already raised. They came from the garden. They came from the sunroom. They came from the top of the stone wall itself. Within seconds, every Rossi gun in the courtyard was staring down the barrel of 2 of Lorenzo's. Lorenzo walked out of the front doors at the top of the wide stone steps. He wore a plain black coat. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Father, Vivian whispered, and her voice cracked in a way it had not cracked once in all the months she had lived inside these walls. Lorenzo lifted one hand. A speaker somewhere on the terrace clicked to life. Out of it, into the frozen courtyard, came Vivian's own voice, clear and confident, from a rainy night in a library many weeks ago. Father, please, do not worry about him. He trusts me completely. He does not question anything I say. No one is going to suspect a thing. Salvatore's face changed by inches. Vivian's changed all at once. Antonio stepped forward beside Lorenzo, holding a small screen in his hand. On it played, in perfect grainy color, the sight of Vivian sliding a small navy velvet box into the lower drawer of a housekeeping cart, arranging the towels above it, and walking calmly away. The hidden camera Antonio had placed the day after Emma's testimony had caught every second of it. 2 other figures stepped out from behind Lorenzo. Sophia, pale but standing, her throat still bandaged, and Emma, tucked safely against her mother's side, small, dark eyes fixed steadily on Vivian. Vivian understood, in that single terrible instant, that she had been the bait all along. Somewhere behind her, a Rossi gun rose. A single shot cracked across the courtyard, and a longer roll of them answered. When the smoke cleared, Don Salvatore Rossi was on his knees in the gravel, Marco was disarmed and bleeding at the shoulder, and every last traitor inside the De Luca house had run out of places left to hide. The morning after that long, terrible night, the sun rose over the estate as if nothing had happened at all. The gravel had been swept clean, the floodlights had been switched off, and Lorenzo De Luca, dressed in a simple dark coat, walked into the small private clinic where Sophia was still recovering. She was sitting up in bed when he entered, her throat still wrapped in soft gauze, her voice still hoarse. Emma sat cross-legged at the foot of the bed, one small hand resting on her mother's blanket. Lorenzo did not sit at first. He stood by the bed with his hat in both hands, the way a much younger man might have stood before his own mother, and he lowered his eyes. "Sophia," he said quietly, "I have come to ask for your forgiveness. You tried to warn me. Twice. 3 times. And every time, I looked at your face and I chose to believe the woman who was lying to me instead of the woman who was cleaning my floors. I have carried a great many burdens in my life. This one I will carry the longest." Sophia's eyes filled, but she did not let the tears fall. She simply reached out and softly placed her hand over his. "You are listening now," she whispered. "That is what matters." Lorenzo turned slowly to Emma. He knelt down beside the bed so that his face was level with hers. The most feared man in the city lowered himself onto one knee for a 3-year-old girl in a hospital nightgown. "Little one," he said. His voice was low and thick. "You are the bravest person in my whole house. Do you understand me? Your phone call saved your mother. It saved me. It saved everyone who lives under my roof. There is no gift in the world large enough for what you gave us. But I am going to spend the rest of my life trying." Emma studied him with those quiet dark eyes. Then, very carefully, she leaned forward and pressed her small forehead against his. Lorenzo closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, the tall, powerful man let out a breath that shook. In the weeks that followed, Sophia did not go back to being only the housekeeper. She stood at Lorenzo's side. Emma no longer moved through those long marble halls as a small shadow no one remembered. She ran through them, laughing, chasing bright light across the floor of a house that had almost forgotten what a child sounded like. The great stone mansion on the hill, silent since Lorenzo's mother died, at last learned again what warmth felt like. Sometimes the person who sees the truth most clearly is the person the world is least willing to listen to. A widow, a quiet housekeeper, a little girl who has not yet learned how to lie. Their voices are small, their names are easy to forget, and yet they are almost always the ones telling the truth. To everyone who stayed with us all the way to the end of tonight's story, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Have you ever felt something in your gut about a person in your life, and pushed that feeling aside, only to wish later that you had listened? Tell us honestly in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what another person needs to read tonight. If this story moved you, please tap that like button, hit subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs the reminder to trust their instincts. It truly helps this small channel keep bringing you stories like Sophia and Emma's every single week. To every single one of you watching from wherever you are in the world, we wish you strong health, quiet peace, and a heart full of small, ordinary joys every day of your life. Take good care of yourselves, take good care of the quiet people around you, and we will see you again very soon in the next story, a family secret buried for 30 years that surfaces at the reading of a will. The smallest voice in a house of powerful men is sometimes the only one telling the truth.